Today, we will delve deeper into the case of Jacob Wetterling, a boy who went missing at the age of 11 and whose remains were found 27 years later. It wasn't until then that the case was finally solved. Jacob Wetterling's full name is Jacob Irwin Wetterling, born on February 17, 1978 in the United States. His family lived in the town of Joseph, Minnesota. His parents, Patty and Jerry, had a total of 4 children, 2 sons, Jacob and Trevor, and 2 daughters, Amy and Carmen. In 1978, the town of Joseph was relatively small, with houses spaced far apart compared to now. It was surrounded by cornfields, small forests, and relatively large roads for trucks to transport goods. However, the town was considered safe, so children often rode their bikes around, and even the police patrols didn't carry guns. In 1989, when Jacob turned 11 and was in the 6th grade, his teacher and friends described him as well-behaved and particularly fond of sports, including soccer, basketball, and hockey. On Sunday, October 22, 1989, Jacob went fishing with his father in the morning, then they returned home to watch a soccer game. In the afternoon, they went ice skating together. That evening, Patty and Jerry had to attend a wedding party for a friend, about 30 kilometers away from home, so they left around 5:30 p.m., planning to return early. They left the children at home to look after each other. To recap Jacob's siblings, Amy, 13 years old, was the eldest, followed by Jacob, 11, then Trevor, 10, and finally the youngest sister Carmen, who had just turned 8. That night, Amy, the eldest sister, wasn't home as she went out to hang out with friends, so only Jacob, Trevor, and Carmen were at home. Additionally, Jacob's friend of the same age, Aaron, also came over to play. The kids had pizza for dinner and then played together, but by 9 p.m., feeling quite bored, they suggested renting a movie to watch. The movie rental store was at a Tom Thumb convenience store, not far from Jacob's house, probably just a 15-minute bike ride away. Jacob was very obedient, asked permission from his parents, though his mother initially disagreed, understandably worried about her children being out late at night. However, after Jacob persuaded his father, he agreed. Jerry thought his son was old enough and brave enough to face the darkness outside. Jacob was concerned about his 8-year-old sister Carmen being home alone, so he asked a 14-year-old neighbor girl to come over and look after her, and then the excited kids set off on their bikes. The town didn't have many streetlights back then, so they had to bring flashlights. They followed the gravel road lined with rocks, straight to the Tom Thumb convenience store. On the way, they heard rustling noises from the cornfields, but they ignored it, thinking it was just some wild animal. After renting the movie, they quickly turned back, but on their way home, they were stopped by a man dressed in all black and wearing a full-face mask, holding a weapon. He demanded the kids to throw their bikes into the ditch and lie face down on the ground. Then, he asked for their ages. Trevor, Jacob's 10-year-old brother, was the first to be released. The boy was asked by him to run straight towards the nearby forest and not to look back, so only Jacob and Aaron, the 2 same-age boys, were left. After looking at the 2 kids, the man decided to keep Jacob and let Aaron go, and this was the last time Jacob was seen alive. It was 9:20 p.m. on October 22, 1989. When Aaron and Trevor ran back home, they immediately told the 14-year-old neighbor girl that Jacob had been taken. She informed her father, who then called Jacob's parents and subsequently called 911. During the call, the police requested to speak directly to Trevor. Trevor described the man who took Jacob as a tall, chubby man wearing a black jacket and a plastic mask. He had a deep, cold voice, and moreover, he was carrying a handgun. The issue arose when the police, after questioning the 2 children further, did not believe them. Initially, the police thought Aaron and Trevor were playing with the gun and accidentally caused Jacob's death, or that Jacob had run away from home, and the 2 children were just covering up to give Jacob more time to run away. So it wasn't until 10:45 p.m. on that night, an hour and a half after the abduction occurred, that the police began to search for Jacob. And it was a massive search, involving firefighters, volunteers, police, and even local authorities. They even used helicopters to search for Jacob's whereabouts throughout the entire area, but all they found were footprints and tire tracks near the gravel road where Jacob was abducted. As I mentioned earlier, back then, houses were quite far apart, so the area where the man stopped the 3 children was also devoid of houses, and the nearest house there belonged to a music teacher named Dan Rossi. Dan said that around 9 p.m. that night, he heard his dog barking loudly outside, and when he peeked out, he saw a car stop near his house, but then the car turned around and drove in the opposite direction. In the following days, extensive searches continued, and indeed, this abduction case shook the small town of Joseph. Media outlets seemed to report on it every day, and even the FBI got involved, with people there even forming large circles, holding hands, hoping the government would take this case seriously, until Jacob was found. However, all their efforts were in vain. Jacob Wetterling remained missing. I think the main reason this case remained unsolved for so long is that the police kept going around in circles. Initially, they relied on the theory that the man who abducted Jacob was the same man driving the car outside Dan Rossi's house. However, in 2004, 15 years after the abduction, the police came up with a surprisingly different hypothesis, suggesting that the suspect might have been on foot, and the person who had the ability to cause this lived very close to the scene. Yes, the police suspected Dan Rossi to be the one who abducted Jacob, simply because his house was the closest to the crime scene, and the car Dan saw around 9 p.m. that night was believed to have been staged by him to deceive the police. So on June 30th, 2010, the police even conducted a thorough search of Dan's entire house and dug up the surrounding land just to prove their theory, but of course, they found nothing. This statement from the police essentially ruined Dan's life because even though he was innocent, his face was plastered across newspapers with notes labeling him as the prime suspect in the case. Until October 28, 2015, the police finally identified a new suspect, and his name was Danny Heinrich. Actually, he wasn't entirely new because Heinrich was the initial suspect in the case and had been questioned by the police before, but because they couldn't get any results, they let him go. Going back almost 30 years, in the year the disappearance occurred in 1989, on January 13th, about 9 months before Jacob's abduction, a 12-year-old boy named Jared was also threatened by a weapons man on the road. He also used a handgun, asked for the name and age, and after looking at Jared's face, he let the boy go with the requirement to run straight towards the forest without looking back. The location of that incident was about 16 kilometers from Jacob's case. Jared, now an adult man, had moved to another city to live. However, in 2015, after learning about Jacob's case, he realized many similarities with his own previous experience. So Jared immediately contacted the police, and luckily the police still had the pants Jared wore and the night he was almost abducted, and they also had Danny Heinrich's baseball cap. After DNA testing, the police concluded that Danny Heinrich was the perpetrator. The police then obtained a warrant to search Danny Heinrich's entire house, and you couldn't imagine what they found. They found numerous rolls of duct tape and handcuffs in the drawer, 4 boxes filled with teenage boys' clothing, and even videotapes recorded by Danny Heinrich himself, depicting horrifying acts forced upon the boys. The police also found 19 bags filled with P. Orno.Gray.Fic books in his basement. So on October 28, 2015, Danny Heinrich was officially arrested by the police. Heinrich spent about a year in jail before being brought to trial, and just about 3 weeks before the court date, Heinrich's lawyer made a highly controversial announcement. It stated that if Heinrich admitted to the kidnapping and killing of Jacob Wetterling and disclosed the location of the body, he would not be prosecuted for this crime and would only have to serve 15 to 20 years for child pornography charges. Heinrich then cooperated with authorities, so on September 1, 2016, he led investigators to the location he had hidden for 27 years. It was a grassy field about 48 kilometers from Jacob's house and only a short distance from Heinrich's home. There, clothing and a skeleton were excavated, and just 2 days later, the skeleton was confirmed to be that of Jacob Wetterling. Jacob's mother, Patty, told a television station, "All I know right now is that Jacob has been found, and it has broken my heart. I can't answer any media at this time because I can't say anything right now." According to Heinrich's confession, Jacob was murdered on the night he was abducted, and the reason Heinrich managed to evade police cars was because he kept track of police movements 24/7 through a radio scanner. Heinrich also confessed to returning to Jacob's burial site a year later and moving the body after realizing Jacob's jacket was exposed. Although Danny Heinrich was only sentenced to 20 years in prison and could be released after 17 years from the start of his sentence, the judge at the trial said that might not happen because Heinrich's crimes were too heinous and brutal, so society not allow him to be free again. In January 2017, Danny Heinrich was transferred to a federal prison in Massachusetts. One fact I've read about after this case is that the Hope Bridge spanning the Mississippi River was named as such in memory of Jacob Wetterling. That's all I found out about the Jacob Wetterling case. Thank you for watching this video until the end. And this is Creep Factor. Thank you for taking the time to watch the entire video. And if you like this video, please click like, share and subscribe to the channel for more interesting contents.